The following story took place shortly before World War II, when a prospector came to the rescue of an injured mother wolf and her pups, and a lasting connection was formed where the laws of nature were temporarily broken. This is his touching story. One spring morning, shortly before the outbreak of World War II, a prospector had been panning for gold along Coho Creek on southeastern Alaska's Kopyanoff Island. He later emerged from a forest of spruce and hemlock and suddenly froze in his tracks. No more than 20 paces away in the bog was a huge Alaskan timber wolf caught in a trap. As he approached, he could see that the trapped animal was confused and frightened at his approach. The wolf then started to back away, straining at the trap chain. Then he noticed something else. It was a female, and her teats were full of milk. Somewhere there was a den of hungry pups waiting for their mother. From her appearance, he guessed that she'd been trapped only a few days. That meant her pups were probably still alive, and possibly no more than a few miles away. But he suspected that if he tried to release the wolf, she would turn aggressive and attack him. So he decided to search for the pups instead and began to look for incoming tracks that might lead him to her den. Fortunately, there were still a few remaining patches of snow, and after several moments, he spotted paw marks on a trail skirting the bog. The tracks led a half-mile through the forest, then up a rock-strewn slope. He finally spotted the den at the base of an enormous spruce. It was deathly quiet. Wolf pups are shy and cautious, and he didn't have much hope of luring them outside, but he had to try some method of getting them out. He then decided imitating the high-pitched squeak of a mother wolf calling her young. No response. A few moments later, he tried another call. 4 tiny pups appeared. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. He extended his hands, and they tentatively suckled at his fingers. It appears that hunger had helped overcome their natural fear. Then, one by one, he placed them in a burlap bag and headed back down the slope. When the mother wolf spotted him, she had overcome any pain barrier caused by the trap and stood erect. She had possibly picked up the scent of her young, and then let out a high-pitched, plaintive whine. He then released the pups, and they raced to her, and within seconds they were sucking at her teats. As he was observing the hungry pups frantically feeding from their mother, he could see that the mother wolf was clearly suffering. But each time he moved in her direction, she let out a menacing growl. With a young to protect, she was extremely protective. The fact that she'd been trapped for a few days meant that she was in need of nourishment. He then went in search of food for her. He then hiked toward Coho Creek and spotted the remain of a deer sticking out of a snowbank. He then sliced off a hind quarter. He quickly returned to the starving mother and quietly whispered, "Okay, mother, I have your dinner, but please stop growling at me." He then tossed chunks of venison in her direction. She sniffed them, then gobbled them up. That night, he decided to sleep close by. So he cut off some hemlock boughs and made himself a rough shelter for the night. At dawn, he was awakened by 4 fluffy bundles of fur sniffing at his face and hands. He then glanced towards the mother wolf, who continued to eye him with extreme suspicion. He desperately needed to win her confidence if he was ever going to release her from the trap. It was her only hope for survival. Over the next few days, he divided his time between prospecting and trying to win the wolf's trust. He talked gently with her, threw her more venison, and played with the pups. Little by little, he kept edging closer, but at the same time, he was keeping a safe distance beyond the length of her chain. The mother wolf never took her dark eyes off of him. "Come on," he pleaded. "Don't you want to rejoin your pack on the mountain? Please, trust me." At dusk on the 5th day, he delivered her daily fare of venison. "Here's dinner," he said softly as he approached. "Come on, girl, nothing to be afraid of." Suddenly, The pups came bounding to him. At least he'd gained their trust. But he was beginning to lose hope of ever winning over the mother. Then he thought he saw a tail wagging, ever so slightly. He then slowly moved within the length of her chain. She remained motionless. His heart was in his mouth. He sat down about 8 feet from her. One snap of her huge jaws and she could break his arm, or worse, his neck. He wrapped his blanket around himself and slowly settled into the cold ground. It was a long time before he fell asleep. He awoke at dawn, stirred by the sound of the pups nursing. Gently, he leaned over and petted them. The mother wolf stiffened. "Good morning, friends," he said tentatively. Then he slowly placed his hand on the wolf's injured leg. She flinched, but made no threatening move. This can't be happening, he thought, and remained wary of the injured mother. He could see that the trapped steel jaws had imprisoned only 2 toes. They were swollen and lacerated, but she wouldn't lose the paw, if he could free her. "Okay," he said, "just a little longer and we'll have you out of there." He then applied pressure and the trap sprang open and the wolf pulled free. Whimpering, she loped about, limping on the injured paw. His experience in the wild suggested that the wolf would now gather her pups and vanish into the woods. But cautiously, she crept towards him. The pups nipped playfully at their mother as she stopped at his elbow. Slowly, she sniffed his hands and arms. Then the wolf began licking his fingers. He was astonished. This went against everything he'd ever heard about timber wolves, yet at the same time it all seemed so natural. After a while, with the pups scurrying around her, the mother wolf was ready to leave and began to limp off towards the forest. Then she turned back to him. He thought, "You want me to come with you?" Curious, he packed his gear and set off. Following Coho Creek for a few miles, they ascended Koprinoff Mountain until they reached an alpine meadow. There, lurking in the forested perimeter, was a wolf pack. He counted 9 adults and, judging by their playful antics, 4 nearly full-grown pups. After a few minutes of greeting, the pack broke into howling. It was an eerie sound, ranging from low wails to high-pitched yodeling. At dark, he set up camp. By the light of his fire and the glistening moon, he could see furtive wolf shapes dodging in and out of the shadows, eyes shining. Yet he had no fear. They were merely curious, and so was he. He awoke at first light, and it was time to leave the wolf to her pack. She watched as he assembled his gear and started walking across the meadow. Reaching the far side, he looked back. The mother and her pups were sitting where he'd left them, watching him. He doesn't know why, but he waved. At the same time, the mother wolf sent a long, mournful howl into the crisp air. He did not return until 4 years later, after serving in World War II. He returned to Coho Creek. It was the fall of 1945. After the horrors of the war, it was good to be back among the soaring spruce and breathing the familiar, bracing air of the Alaskan bush. Then he saw, hanging in the red cedar where he'd placed it 4 years before, the now rusted steel trap that had ensnared the mother wolf. The sight of it gave him a strange feeling, and something made him climb Koprinoff Mountain to the meadow we'd last seen her. There, standing on a lofty ledge, he gave out a long, low wolf call, something he had done many times before. An echo came back across the distance. Again he called out, and again the echo reverberated, this time followed by a wolf call from a ridge about a half-mile away. Then, far off, he saw a dark shape moving slowly in his direction. As it crossed the meadow, he could see it was a timber wolf. A chill spread through his whole body. He knew at once that familiar shape, even after 4 years. "Hello, old girl," he called gently. The wolf edged closer, ears erect, body tense, and stopped a few yards off, her bushy tail wagging slightly. Moments later, the wolf was gone. He left Kopianov Island a short time after that, and he never saw the animal again. But the memory she left with him, vivid, haunting, a little eerie, will always be there, a reminder that there are things in nature that exist outside the laws and understanding of humans. During that brief instant in time, this injured animal and he had somehow penetrated each other's worlds, bridging barriers that were never meant to be bridged. There was no explanation for this event. For that brief moment in time, their animal spirits had touched one another.